Thanks very much, Thomas and Julie, for that wide-ranging conversation on energy capital and financing. I'm certainly excited for the busy summer and fall news to come out of EDF. For this next panel, we're excited to be having a conversation on advancing petrochemical innovation. This is one of the most important industries for our global economy and for energy, and we're interested to see what Ross Eisenberg, president of the American Plastic Makers, and Julius Krein, editor of American Affairs, are going to have to discuss about this and the opportunities to advance really interesting new innovations in place to be able to reuse plastics in new ways and to advance energy dominance at the same time. Please welcome Julius and Ross to the stage.
Well, thank you very much. And full disclosure to the audience, I consider myself very well qualified to moderate this. I know almost nothing about your industry, so bring a truly fresh perspective to the discussion, and we'll ensure that everything is communicated very intelligibly. But why don't we start maybe just with a little context, recent history on the sector. I think, I am very excited about this because it's rare in energy policy discussions too often to discuss some of the adjacent sectors and how that interacts. So tell us a little bit about the recent history and where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for having me. And again, not surprised that you don't think of the chemical industry or the plastics industry when we're talking about energy. But we are an energy story. And really, when you think about energy imperatives, one of the things that has been really one of the true benefits of the shale gas renaissance over the past 15, 20 years is that it unleashed a bit of a manufacturing renaissance. And the primary beneficiaries of that were the petrochemical industry, right? It was literally the chemical industry. So generally speaking, you use natural gas, you use shale gas for energy. You also use it in the chemical industry as a feedstock for all the different chemistries that we make. And in plastics in particular, we are significantly more competitive because of it, and even chemistry. So the rest of the world makes chemicals and plastics from naphtha, which is derived from oil. In the US, we make chemicals and plastics from ethane, which is derived from that shale gas. And because we have so much of it here in the United States, we are significantly more competitive because of it. And over the past 15, 20 years, we've seen a tremendous build out in our industry from this. So 2008, 2010, we started tracking the new investments in the chemicals and plastics industry that were derived from shale gas. And you can just, the companies were announcing that was why they were doing it. And you could see where they were. They were in the Gulf Coast. They were in the Pennsylvania, Ohio region, places like that. Over the past 16 years, I guess, since 2010, we've tracked $200 billion worth of new investment in the chemical industry in the U.S. because of shale gas. Of that, 40 billion was plastics. So we went from a relatively flat industry in the United States to something that is literally the number 2 producer in the world. We have a $21 billion trade surplus when it comes to plastics, so we're exporting more than we actually use here. We're supplying the rest of the world. The only country that's doing more than us is China. I think you know why, but at the same time, we are the dominant second biggest producer in the world, and it's a really tremendous energy story. Overall, the numbers of our industry are huge: $1.1 trillion, dollars in impact, 670,000 direct jobs, 5 million, sort of supported jobs around the country. We're in everything that we do. We are ubiquitous. It's just a great sort of American energy story.
Yeah, I'd like to just expand a little bit more on the China. I think you know why. Given the cheaper feedstocks and those advantages there, kind of other than sort of outright subsidization, kind of what are the challenges and where does the U.S. industry tend to sit overall, kind of in the global supply chain on this stuff?
So we're number 2, right? And EU is shrinking while we are sort of growing. But China is number 1 by a mile in terms of plastics production. The challenges are the same as other sectors, right? They are building at a scale and a speed that is significantly faster than anywhere else. My president and CEO recently was in China and went by a brand new petrochemical facility in inland China that was an order of magnitude larger than the Houston Ship Channel. So gigantic, brand new, the most state-of-the-art, efficient technologies being brought online, and they're just building, right? This is what they do. And so, so obviously, competitiveness threats. Again, that energy advantage is a big deal here. So, so we are still doing pretty darn well. But it is it's an issue. One of the areas that we're seeing real challenges with respect to sort of, and it's not just Chinese, but it is essentially global competition, is actually on the recycled content space. You wouldn't think of that, and it's probably a good transition to kind of what we've been doing a lot of here in Washington, which is actually the end of life piece of the puzzle for plastics. It's competitive to manufacture them here. There's millions of uses for them. We use them in literally everything, whether it's technology or healthcare or your car. Half of your car is literally made of plastic. Your airplanes, all these things. Nobody really is really arguing with that. We have an end of life issue, particularly with the packaging side, but on all plastics. And sort of what do you do with it at the end of its life? That is a place where China is also really investing significantly. Our counterparts, essentially the ACC of China, recently announced that they were going to get to 50% recycled plastic targets. And when they say they're going to do it, they probably will do it. And so that is a real challenge for us as we struggle to be really in single digits on plastics recycling in the United States. And we risk being sort of flushed out of a market as the globe kind of starts to integrate recycled content into products that we're not part of. And so hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that. I got a lot to say about that and sort of the new technologies that we can get us there.
Yeah, say more about that. I mean, it's an incredible growth story that I think has gone maybe largely unheralded. But outside of the Chinese competition, what kind of closer to home is inhibiting some of these investments in the waste, in the recycling?
Yep. All right, we're gonna do an audience exercise. Raise your hand if you recycle at home. Do you have a recycle bin at home? All right. Keep your hand raised if you believe that when you put your plastic in that recycle bin, it's gonna get recycled. All right, you work with me, so you gotta put your hand down. So that's our problem, right? In a nutshell, that is our problem, is that you either don't think it's gonna get recycled, you don't know it's gonna get recycled, or really it's not gonna get recycled. We have a system for recycling in the United States that was built in the 1970s for, the products that we were making in the 1970s, right? It works really, really well for those things. It doesn't really work for some of the newer stuff that has evolved. And a lot of that is plastics. Plastics are not one kind of plastic. That potato chip bag is actually 7 layers of plastic and foil at the end of it. And so something that looks fairly simple winds up being very, very complicated. And then you think about the sort of plastic that you're using to, that is the quality to make sure that your meat doesn't spoil versus the kind that you're putting in a car bumper versus the kind that you're using in an airbag or a seatbelt or something like that. So all kinds of different plastics. Our system is not built to deal with that. And more importantly, the whole supply chain for plastics in the US and really around the world was a linear supply chain, right? You make it, you use it, you throw it away. That is not sufficient anymore. Number one, it's not really resource effective, right? We have resources that we can be, capturing and essentially be remaking things out of. At the same time, customers are demanding that we do something about it. Landfills are filling up, all of these things. And obviously we have a growing waste problem around the world. A lot of it doesn't come from the US, but at the same time, we have better waste management systems in the US. There's close to 3 billion people in the world who don't have any access to waste management. So we've got a waste problem. What we're dealing with here, though, is the evolution of that infrastructure that, just like any other infrastructure, is not modern. And so a big part of what we've been trying to do is there's some new technologies online that can really solve some of these problems. We call it advanced recycling. Others call it chemical recycling. It is all the same. What it refers to is a suite of technologies that essentially take used plastic, take it back down to its elements, take it back down to essentially the oil and the gas, and then turn it into plastic again. So the analogy I like to use is like unbaking a cake. You could unbake a cake, right? So you had a cake, you could take it back down to its butter and its milk and its sugar and its flour, and then you turn it into a cake again, and then you do it all over again and again and again. That's advanced recycling. And we can do this. We are doing this right now. Exxon's doing it in Texas. There's smaller independent companies doing it in Atlanta and in Akron and in North Carolina. And we're doing it here. There's another 80 or so around the world that are doing this right now. Advanced recycling is extremely, extremely effective for those plastics that you put in the bin that aren't going to get recycled, right? or at least you think aren't going to get recycled. The flexible stuff, the pouches, the gummy bear pouches, right? The plastic wrap that's going on your food, anything that isn't like a milk jug or a bottle or a detergent bottle. Those get recycled just fine through what is essentially called mechanical recycling, which is grinding it up, washing it, and remelting it and turning it into plastic again. But you need essentially chemistry to get to these other things. The good news is you can. There's a suite of different chemical technologies that can do it. They're all enforced right now. They're being used, and there's tremendous opportunity there. We need to bring those online, and that is what we have been fixated at ACC and America's Plastic Makers on getting done for the past few years. We're getting closer, but there's a long way to go because, as you know, politics and as you know, government works sort of at a relatively incremental speed, but we're making progress.
I want to come back to the policy specifics in a second, and I wish the Julie from EDF was still here. But let's get a little bit more concrete on kind of what exactly the investments are that need to be made, and who's going to be making them. You mentioned Exxon. Is it companies like that are making these investments?
So there's essentially two different kinds of companies that we see in this advanced recycling space. One is the petrochemical industry, right? Is essentially taking existing assets that you can repurpose for it. A lot of refineries have what are called pyrolysis units on site, and you can use pyrolysis to essentially do this advanced recycling to unbake the cake. And so Exxon's doing it in Baytown because they have a pyrolysis unit that they can use for this. So essentially all it requires is a different input and a different output. Instead of sending virgin content through that, they're sending, they literally have a tower where when I was visiting, they were putting shredded up surgical masks in, and it goes right into the rest of the refinery and essentially comes out just like the virgin stuff they're putting in, right? Just like if they put shale gas or natural gas liquids in. And it's indistinguishable. The output is literally the same plastic. So really, really cool. And a number of the petrochemical, sort of the oil refiners are looking at doing things that way. Shell had plans to do it up in Pennsylvania. Not sure if they're still doing it that way, but they have plans to do it there. A lot of our other members, Oxy, Chevron Phillips Chemical, which is the JV between P66 and Chevron. But essentially, there's that group. Then there's the independent ones, which are, more startup type companies, and they have smaller units that are either modular or are literally operating in an office park, and they have one or two lines that go through. It's definitely not at the industrial scale that, Exxon or even Eastman Chemical in Tennessee is at. But they're doing it as well, and it's going to take both of them. I think there's a market for both, right? Not everybody's going to be able to put all of their plastic on a train and send it to a refinery. And so these smaller ones will help in those ways too. And I think there's that market for both of them is there. The investment is there. What they desperately need is two things. They obviously need to have clear permitting and know how, if you're going to build one of these things, they can build it, which I hope we can get into. And then the other side of it is they want their customers to know that if they start putting it in their products, that it's going to count. Right? That if you say I'm taking recycled, these sunglasses have recycled plastic in it, and some of that plastic is via advanced recycling, that it's going to count as recycled content. Neither of those two things is clear in federal policy right now, and it's really unclear at the state level. And those are the things we're trying to solve.
It's not every day I learn a new word, but I'm excited to drop the term pyrolysis at dinner tonight.
That's right.
Yeah, let's go. This is a very sophisticated audience. You might not know it from me, but they're taking notes. They're paying attention on particular, the policy and refinery issues. That's come up a few times at this conference. Obviously, it's been a problem for a long time. But what specifically are we talking about here?
So obviously, like any other permit, the common enemy is time. Right? The longer it takes to get these things done, the less likely it is that you're going to build because you have to line up. I mean, there's not cheap facilities. You got to line up the capital. You have to line up all the sort of deadlines and the timelines. And again, with a new technology that doesn't have existing and established sort of legal frameworks in place, that sort of gray area, what is it? How do you regulate it? How is it regulated? It is almost like the worst possible situation you can be in when you're getting a permit, right? Every one of those big permits we've been fighting over all the years, it was always about a gray area, right? What are the downstream impacts of Keystone XL? What are the downstream impacts of Dakota X, right? Like things like that. And so because there wasn't a clear answer legally in either of those cases, it was the Wild West. We have a similar problem on permitting these advanced recycling facilities. Specifically, how does the Clean Air Act apply? What section do you put it in? Is it manufacturing? Is it something else? And then the other issue is on the sort of labeling side, essentially, not necessarily labeling, but sort of the brand side. Does it count when they're saying, hey, we put recycled content in this? So one is an EPA issue, the other is an FTC issue. Both of them can be done by the agencies on their own motion. EPA actually is acting to sort out the Clean Air Act issue so that you can get your permit and at least know how it's regulated. And let me be clear, we're not afraid of regulation. The chemical industry is literally the heaviest regulated industrial sector, as it should be, right? I mean, we're making chemicals. At the same time, we just want to know where to regulate it, right? And there has been a movement for a couple years to treat advanced recycling as incineration, which is scientifically, legally, just not remotely the case. But if you treat it as incineration and solid waste incineration, can't recycle it anymore. So you can't sell it as recycled products. You're essentially, it's a bit of a poison pill. So we have been arguing, as I think is the legally correct argument, that it should be regulated as manufacturing. EPA agrees, and they are taking action to do that, and hopefully can have that resolved in the next couple of years. On the FTC side, it's a more complicated answer, and that's why we've got some legislation that we are working with a number of our colleagues that represent consumer brands to try to get done. There's a bill called the Recycled Materials Attribution Act, HR 7502. It's bipartisan. It's got 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats on it, which, as you know, in the environmental space, kind of unheard of these days. And it essentially does just that. It tells FTC, okay, settle this and make sure that if you are recycling content via mechanical recycling or advanced recycling or any other magical kind of recycling, and a brand uses it and they say on the label, hey, this is from recycled content, they get credit for it, which we think will be the right kind of demand pull for, to give us the confidence to keep building some of these facilities and bring more of them online. So we hope that one gets done this year.
That was even very clear to me, so I appreciate that.
No problem.
We've gone from, energy down to petrochemicals and plastics. I wonder, going the other way back, does this recycling, how does that impact the fuel supply chain going the other way? Are there alkane feedstocks or other significant items to bolster the other side?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about doing it through chemistry is essentially you're getting the building blocks the same way you would have gotten them out of the ground, right? So you are integrating, essentially, you're taking what once was a waste, right, and is no longer a waste product, and you are turning it into the same kind of product that you would have pulled right out of the ground, and the end product is indistinguishable. So you can make lots of things from it, right? You can make fuels, you can make chemicals, and at some of these sophisticated refineries, you certainly can do all of those things. At the end of the day, we hope that we're just making valuable products out of this stuff. My remit is to get that recycling number up. So the more we can turn it into plastic, the better. And as long as there's demand for it, that's a win. The thing that we keep trying to tell lawmakers and anybody who will listen to us is that this is not just an environmental story, right? It is absolutely an environmental story. You recycle because it's good for the environment, and this stuff doesn't belong in landfills. It certainly doesn't belong in the environment, particularly when you can reuse it. But there's an economic story here too. So we had our economics division look at, okay, what if we took 50% of the plastics that you would just normally send to landfills in the municipal solid waste stream, and let's say we recycled them instead by any means necessary, right? Through mechanical recycling, where you're taking you're grinding it up and washing it and pushing out new pellets, or through advanced recycling. What does that mean from an economic standpoint? And the numbers are pretty big. So if you just took half of them, so 50% of that, you could wind up with 173,000 new jobs, $48.7 billion in new economic activity. It's roughly the equivalent of the milk industry again, right? So it's a big industry. You don't think of recycling as a job creator. Recycling is a job creator. And there are all kinds of jobs when you think about it, right? Because the recycling value chain is pretty wide. It's the folks collecting it from the curbside. It's the folks working at the sortation facilities. It's going to be the people behind the computers, working with the AI to do the optical sorting and things like that. And then it's going to be the folks operating either the mechanical or the chemical facilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So really interesting supply chain, all flavors of jobs, and a pretty significant economic impact if we can do this right. In addition to, like we started with, it making us economically competitive versus the rest of the world who are doing this already. And we can stay competitive with our global competitors in plastics.
I think that's a great place to end. I don't think I can improve on that. And we are ready for lunch. So
All right.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
guys. I appreciate it.